Commander stared at the casualty reports with growing despair. Another battle, another devastating loss. His soldiers had the best weapons in the galaxy, armor that could stop plasma rounds, and tactical computers that processed battlefield data faster than any organic mind. Yet they died by the thousands. The holographic display showed the pattern repeating across a dozen worlds. Coalition forces would engage the Devourers, hold position for the initial exchange, then crumble when communications were disrupted or commanders were killed. Soldiers would freeze, waiting for orders that never came. Units would retreat when they should advance, or hold ground when they should fall back. The technology was perfect. The soldiers were not. "They fight like technicians," General of the Hive said, her mandibles clicking in frustration. "We teach them every tactic, every formation, every possible scenario, but war does not follow the manual." The emergency military summit had brought together representatives from all coalition species. The magnificent chamber on Unity Station usually hosted diplomatic functions, but today it served as a war room. Holographic displays showed shrinking territory and climbing death tolls. The Devourers were winning, and everyone knew it. Ambassador Sarah from Earth sat quietly through most of the meeting, letting the alien commanders argue about training protocols and tactical doctrine. She'd been sent to observe, not participate. Humanity had only joined the Galactic Coalition 3 years ago, and Earth's military was considered primitive by galactic standards. Humans still used chemical propellants in some weapons. Their ships were slow. Their technology was centuries behind, but had brought data that told a different story. "May I speak?" she asked during a lull in the argument. Gestured assent. The human was young by galactic standards, barely 40 cycles old, but she carried herself with unusual confidence. Activated her, sending files to everyone's displays. "These are combat reports from the Battle of Ridge. 3 months ago, a mixed coalition force held a defensive position against Devourer assault. The force included 1 battalion, 1 swarm unit, 1 Mindcast regiment, and 1 human marine company." "I remember this battle," said. "We lost 60% of our forces but held the position." "Yes, Commander, but look at the breakdown," highlighted the data. "The battalion took 72% casualties, the lost 68%, the lost 55%. The human company lost 18%. Silence filled the chamber. "The humans held the most contested section of the line," continued. "They were cut off from command for 6 hours when Devourer jammers took down communications. Their technology was inferior to everyone else's. Their armor stopped fewer hits. Their weapons had shorter range. Yet they had the highest survival rate and completed objectives the other units considered impossible." "Perhaps humans are simply more durable," suggested Mindspeaker. Shook her head. "Medical analysis shows humans are average in durability. We're not stronger, faster, or tougher than most coalition species. We're actually weaker than in every physical category." She pulled up more data. "But we've studied 37 battles where human units fought alongside coalition forces. The pattern repeats. Human soldiers survive more, adapt faster, and maintain effectiveness when circumstances deviate from the plan." "What is the explanation?" General demanded. "Training methodology," said simply. "Specifically, how we train soldiers to handle stress, chaos, and the psychological horror of combat." She showed footage from a human military training facility. Alien observers watched as a human in uniform shouted inches from a recruit's face, veins bulging, spittle flying. The recruit stood rigid, face blank, while the instructor berated him for some minor infraction. "That is abuse," said, recoiling. "You torture your own soldiers." "We call them drill sergeants," explained. "And no, it's not torture. It's stress inoculation. We deliberately create controlled chaos and psychological pressure during training so soldiers learn to function under real chaos and pressure in combat." Studied the footage with interest. In culture, such behavior would result in a duel to the death. Yet the human recruit in the video wasn't angry or broken. He simply stood and took it. "Your species trains through humiliation?" he asked. "We train through adversity," corrected. "Drill sergeants don't just teach combat skills. They identify each recruit's breaking point, push them past it in a safe environment, and teach them how to recover and keep functioning. When communications fail in battle, human soldiers don't freeze because they've already trained extensively in situations where they had no guidance and had to make decisions under extreme stress." She showed more footage. Recruits crawling through mud under barbed wire while instructors fired weapons over their heads. Soldiers running until they collapsed, then being ordered to run more. Trainees standing at attention in the rain for hours while instructors found fault with every tiny detail. "You break them psychologically," General observed. "This seems counterproductive." "Everyone breaks eventually," said quietly. "The question is whether they break during training, where we can teach them to recover, or during combat, where breaking gets them killed. Our drill sergeants deliberately create the mental and emotional conditions of warfare before recruits ever see real combat." She pulled up comparative data. Coalition training emphasizes technical proficiency, tactical knowledge, and physical conditioning. All important, but you don't train soldiers to handle fear, confusion, exhaustion, or the isolation of being cut off from command. Humans do. That's why we survive. The chamber fell silent as the military leaders processed this information. "The Devourers are winning because we field technicians with weapons," said slowly. "Humanity fields warriors who happen to have weapons. The difference is psychological resilience, not technology." "Correct," agreed. "Your training methods would not work with other species," insisted. "Are telepathic. We would sense that the instructor's anger is performance, not genuine. The training would be meaningless." "Culture forbids such disrespect," added. "A drill sergeant who behaved that way would be challenged to honorable combat within minutes." "Psychology is collective," General said. "We do not respond to individual criticism. It does not compute for our hive conditioning." Nodded. "You're all correct. Human drill sergeant methods wouldn't work exactly the same way with your species. They'd have to be adapted. But the core principle remains valid. Soldiers need to be forged under pressure, not just educated in tactics." "Are you suggesting we request human trainers?" asked. "I'm suggesting an experiment," replied. 3 volunteer divisions, one from 3 different species. We provide human drill sergeants who will adapt their methods to each species' psychology and culture. 12 weeks of training. Then we evaluate the results in controlled combat simulations against both coalition-trained units and actual Devourer forces." "And if this experiment fails?" General asked. "Then we've wasted 12 weeks and confirmed that human methods don't translate to other species. But if it succeeds, we gain the ability to produce soldiers instead of technicians across the entire coalition military." The debate lasted 3 more hours. Many argued against it. The cultural conflicts seemed insurmountable. The risk of psychological damage to recruits was real. The entire concept violated multiple species' ethical frameworks. But the casualty reports kept coming in. Another world lost. Another division slaughtered. The Devourers were pushing deeper into coalition space, and nothing was stopping them. Finally made his decision. "I will volunteer a division. If humans can train my soldiers to fight like human Marines, we will have a chance." "The will also volunteer," General said after a moment. "We must try something different." Was last to agree, his mental voice heavy with doubt. "The will participate, but I formally object to this methodology and predict it will fail with telepathic species." Transmitted the acceptance to Earth Military Command. 3 days later, she received confirmation. 3 human drill sergeants had been selected and were already en route. Staff Sergeant Maria had 15 years of experience turning civilians into Marines. Gunnery Sergeant James had trained soldiers from 6 different Earth nations. Senior drill instructor Wei was a legend who'd never had a recruit fail to complete training. When informed them of their assignments, laughed for 5 minutes straight. "You want me to yell at 7-foot space lizards who consider yelling a death insult?" she asked. "I get to train insect soldiers with hive minds who never experienced individual criticism," said, shaking his head in disbelief. Wei simply nodded once. "I will train the telepaths who can sense emotions. This will be interesting." Ambassador briefed them on cultural considerations, species psychology, and the stakes. The Devourers had just taken 3 more systems. Coalition military effectiveness was collapsing. This experiment was a desperate measure born of desperation. "No pressure," muttered. "Just save the galaxy by teaching aliens to embrace the suck." "We're not teaching them to be human," Wei said quietly. "We're teaching them principles that work regardless of species: stress inoculation, mental resilience, unit cohesion under pressure. These are not human traits. They are warrior traits. Humans simply formalize the training methodology. So we figure out how to make it work with different brain chemistry, social structures, and cultural values," said. "Easy." The 3 drill sergeants departed for their respective training facilities, each wondering if they were about to make history or become a footnote in humanity's brief time among the stars. On Earth, military analysts ran probability simulations. The odds of success were estimated at 37%. But humans had succeeded against worse odds before, usually by doing something everyone else considered impossible or insane. This qualified as both. The transports carrying the 3 drill sergeants jumped to faster-than-light travel, heading for 3 different worlds where alien volunteers waited nervously. None of the recruits knew what was coming. How could they? Nothing in their experience had prepared them for the human approach to military training. They were about to learn why human soldiers had the highest survival rate in the galaxy, and why the seemingly primitive species from Earth consistently outperformed their technologically superior allies. The lesson would be brutal, transformative, and unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Because humans didn't teach soldiers what to think, they taught them how to think when everything went to hell. And in war, everything always went to hell. Staff Sergeant Maria stepped off the transport onto Prime and immediately assessed her new environment. The training facility was immaculate, all polished stone and precise geometry. Soldiers stood in perfect formation, their reptilian features composed and dignified. They were tall, powerful, and utterly confident in their superiority. Smiled. Pride was something she knew how to work with. Her translator unit chirped as the training commander, a massive reptilian warrior named N, approached. He towered over her by 2 feet, his scales gleaming in the sun. "Human," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "I am told you will instruct our soldiers in your methods. I must inform you that do not respond to shouting or disrespect. Our honor code forbids it. You will need to adjust your primitive techniques." Looked up at him, her expression pleasant. "Understood, Commander, I'll adapt." And seemed surprised by her easy agreement. He'd expected argument. "The recruits are assembled. They are the finest warriors our world has produced. Do not waste their time with nonsense." Walked past him to inspect the formation. 200 soldiers stood at attention, their bearing perfect. They looked magnificent, deadly, untested. She walked slowly down the line, examining each soldier with a critical eye. None of them met her gaze. In culture, eye contact was a challenge. She noted their stance, their equipment maintenance, their micro-expressions. Finally, she returned to the front of the formation. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, almost conversational. "I'm Staff Sergeant. For the next 12 weeks, your training is my responsibility. I will not yell at you. I will not disrespect you. But I will expect perfection because anything less will get you killed." She paused, letting them process. You're all warriors from noble families. You've trained since childhood in combat arts. You believe you're ready for war. Another pause. You're not. A ripple of offense moved through the formation, and tensed, expecting confrontation. Continued in that same quiet, almost disappointed tone. You're technicians, very skilled technicians, but the devourers don't care about your skills. They care that you break when things don't go according to plan, and you will break because you've never been trained to handle chaos. She gestured to the pristine training ground. This facility is perfect, clean, organized. War is not. War is mud, blood, confusion, and terror. War is watching your commander die and having to make decisions with incomplete information while people are shooting at you. War is being cut off from support, surrounded, and having to fight your way out while your friends bleed. The formation remained silent, but she could see the doubt in their eyes now. I'm going to teach you how to function when everything goes wrong, said. But first, we need to establish something. Your pride, your honor, your noble heritage mean nothing here. You're all equally unprepared. You'll start as equals and earn distinction through performance. One soldier, his scales marked with aristocratic patterns, stepped forward. Human, I am Lord of the Crimson Peaks. My family has produced generals for 20 generations. I will not be treated as a common recruit. Walked over to him slowly. She looked up at the 7-foot reptilian warrior and smiled slightly. Lord, I appreciate you volunteering. Please do 20 push-ups. Stared at her. That is beneath my station. I understand, said, her voice still quiet. You're right, it is beneath your station. She turned to the formation. Everyone except Lord begin push-ups. Continue until I say stop. The formation hesitated, then dropped as one. Stood beside, watching his comrades perform push-ups because of his refusal. After 2 minutes, she hadn't said stop. They were strong, but 200 push-ups was taxing even for them. After 5 minutes, some were struggling. After 8, several were shaking with effort. Scales had darkened with emotion. In culture, responsibility to one's unit was sacred. You may stop them by joining them, said quietly. Dropped and began push-ups. Waited 30 seconds, then said, formation halt, return to attention. The soldiers stood, several breathing hard. Addressed them all. Lord learned something just now. Your pride is not more important than your unit. Your station means nothing if your actions harm your brothers. This is the first lesson. She looked at, thank you for volunteering to learn it first. And watched this exchange with fascination. The human hadn't yelled, hadn't disrespected anyone, but she'd made her point with devastating clarity, using cultural values against their assumptions. Over the next week, systematically dismantled everything the thought they knew. She didn't insult them. She expressed disappointment. She didn't yell. She spoke more quietly when she was most displeased, forcing them to strain to hear her criticisms. She didn't challenge their honor. She made them responsible for each other's failures. When a soldier failed an obstacle course, his entire squad repeated it. When someone's equipment wasn't perfectly maintained, the whole platoon stood inspection until the problem was corrected. When an aristocrat complained about conditions, had him explain to his unit why his comfort was more important than their training time. They, raised in a culture of personal honor, discovered something new: collective responsibility under pressure. Meanwhile, on Hive World 7, Gunnery Sergeant James faced a different challenge. Their psychology fundamentally alien. They communicated through pheromones and telepathic hive links. Individual identity was weak. They'd never been criticized as individuals because they barely considered themselves individuals. Translator was barely adequate for the chemical and telepathic components of their language, but he made do. The swarm assembled before him, hundreds of identical-looking soldiers, their compound eyes reflecting rainbow patterns in the light. I'm Gunnery Sergeant, he announced. I understand your psychology is collective. You think of yourselves as parts of a greater whole. That's fine. We're going to use that. He divided them into squads of 12. From now on, your squad is your hive. You succeed together or fail together. No individual performance matters, only squad performance. The first test was simple, an obstacle course. Each squad had to complete it with all members finishing within 30 seconds of each other. The fastest squad completed it in 8 minutes. The slowest took 14 minutes. Unacceptable, said. All squads will repeat the course. If any squad fails to improve their time, every squad repeats again. They struggled with this. They were used to thinking of all as one hive. Suddenly they were competing against other, but also dependent on those same others not to fail. It created a new kind of pressure. Individuals began pushing themselves harder because their squad mates depended on them. Squads began developing unique tactics and coordination patterns. The hive mind that usually made them uniform started expressing variations based on squad composition. Watched this evolution with satisfaction. He was teaching them a human truth. The smallest effective unit in combat isn't the individual or the army. It's the squad. Brothers and sisters who fight together, adapt together, and refuse to fail each other. On senior drill instructor Wei faced his own unique challenge. They were telepathic and empathic. They could sense his emotions, his thoughts, his intentions. Traditional drill instructor psychology was impossible. They knew his anger was performance. They could feel his underlying care for their development. So Wei did something unprecedented. He told them the truth. "I'm drill instructor," he said to the assembled recruits. "You can sense my emotions, so there's no point in traditional drill instructor theater. Instead, I'm going to explain exactly what we're doing and why." He projected images of combat, real footage from human wars, soldiers dying, people screaming, chaos and blood and terror. Some of them recoiled from the emotional content. "This is war," said quietly. "It's not like your simulations. It's not clean or logical. It creates fear so intense it can paralyze you, horror that can break your mind, stress that can make you forget your own name." He let them process that. "I'm going to deliberately create some of those conditions during training, not to hurt you, not because I enjoy it, but because if you experience controlled fear here, you can learn to function through it. If your first experience with that level of stress is in real combat, you'll die." A step forward, her mental voice questioning. "But we will sense that the danger is not real. How can we learn to overcome fear when we know we're safe?" Smiled. "We're going to use your telepathy differently. I'm a combat veteran. I've seen war. When I recall those memories during your training, you'll sense the genuine horror I experienced. You'll feel the real fear I felt. Your telepathy will make this training more effective, not less." Over the following days, would run them through exercises while deliberately remembering his own combat experiences. They felt his genuine terror during a firefight, his real grief watching friends die, his authentic exhaustion after days without sleep under enemy fire. They experienced those emotions secondhand while performing training tasks. It was brutal in a completely different way than traditional drill instructor methods. But it worked. They learned to function while experiencing intense fear because they practiced doing exactly that, guided by someone who'd survived the real thing. All 3 drill sergeants pushed their alien recruits harder than anything they'd experienced. They identified cultural and psychological differences, adapted their methods, but never compromised the core goal: forge soldiers who could function under the worst conditions imaginable. The recruits thought they were being trained to fight. They were actually being trained to survive fighting, which was completely different. And in the dark spaces between stars, the Devourers continued their advance, unaware that the galaxy was learning humanity's most dangerous lesson. Technology doesn't win wars. Warriors do. 6 weeks into training, all 3 drill sergeants faced the same crisis. Their recruits were breaking. On Prime, Lord approached after a particularly brutal day. The aristocratic warrior looked exhausted, his scales dulled, his posture defeated. Staff Sergeant, I must withdraw from the program. Studied him, why? I have failed, said quietly. Today I froze during the combat simulation. My squad was ambushed, communications were down, and I could not decide what to do. My hesitation got 3 of my brothers killed in the simulation. I am not fit to lead. Sit down, Lord said, gesturing to a bench. She sat beside him, which surprised him. Drill instructors didn't sit casually with recruits. Let me tell you about my 3rd deployment, began. I was a corporal leading a fire team in an urban combat zone. We got separated from our platoon, communications went dead, and we were pinned down by enemy fire. I froze, just like you did today. Couldn't think, couldn't move, couldn't decide. One of my Marines was shot while I sat there doing nothing. Looked at her with surprise. But you are a staff sergeant, a trainer of soldiers. How did you overcome such failure? I didn't overcome it that day, said. That night I wanted to quit, thought I wasn't fit to lead. But my platoon sergeant found me and said something I'll never forget. He said, everyone freezes eventually. The difference between a technician and a warrior is what happens next. Technicians quit. Warriors learn and try again. She turned to face directly. You froze today in a simulation. That's good. That means when it happens in real combat, and it will happen because everyone has that moment, you'll already know how to recover. You'll recognize the feeling and push through it. But I cost lives, protested. In a simulation, emphasized. Those brothers are alive and will train with you tomorrow. That's the whole point of training. We create failure here so you learn from it safely. The Marine who got shot because I froze, he died for real. You're lucky enough to learn the lesson without that cost. Was silent for a long moment. You believe I can overcome this? I know you can, said, because you came here to tell me you failed. Soldiers who can't grow hide their failures. Warriors acknowledge them and improve. Tomorrow we run the simulation again. You'll probably fail again, different way. That's fine. We keep going until you don't fail, however long it takes. On Hive World 7 faced a different crisis. One of his squads was falling apart psychologically. They had evolved to merge mentally with their hive, sharing thoughts and emotions. Training was forcing them to think independently within their squad unit, creating a painful cognitive split. Worker-soldier Al approached him, her mandibles clicking erratically. Gunnery Sergeant, request permission to speak. Granted. The pressure is breaking hive connections, Al said. We feel isolated from the greater swarm. It is painful. 3 of my squad members are experiencing neural stress. We cannot adapt to individual thinking. It is not how we are built. Had anticipated this. Come with me, bring your whole squad. He led them to a room where he'd set up a display. Humans aren't a hive mind, but we understand what you're experiencing. Let me show you something. He played footage of human military units. Marines in combat, soldiers under fire, teams operating in hostile territory. Watch how they move. Each human is an individual, but they function like a single organism. They anticipate each other's actions. They coordinate without explicit communication. They trust each other absolutely. How? Al asked. Without hive mind, how do they achieve such unity? They build it, explained. Through shared hardship, training, and trust. Humans call it unit cohesion. It's not telepathic, but it's real. Marines say they die for their brothers, and they mean it literally. He turned to face the squad. You're experiencing pain because your hive-mind connection is weakening, but you're building something to replace it. Your squad is becoming a different kind of hive. Not telepathic, but bound by experience and trust. It hurts now because you're caught between 2 ways of being. Push through it and you'll have both. You'll be individuals who choose to fight as one, which is more powerful than individuals who have no choice. Can truly achieve this? Al asked. You're already doing it, said. Your squad's coordination scores have improved every week. You're adapting to each other's individual strengths and compensating for weaknesses. That's not hive mind programming. That's your squad learning to be brothers. It hurts because growth hurts, but the result is worth it. On, Wei sat with a recruit named M who was experiencing complete emotional shutdown. The young had participated in a training exercise where deliberately recalled traumatic combat memories while the recruits performed under stress. M had been overwhelmed by the second-hand emotional intensity and collapsed. "I cannot continue," M said, his mental voice barely a whisper. "The horror is too much. I felt you watch friends die. I experienced your fear when you thought you would not survive. How do you live with such memories?" Sat in silence for a moment, organizing his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his mental voice was gentle but firm. "You asked how I live with it. The answer is not well sometimes. I have nightmares. I see their faces. But I'm still here, still functional because I learned something important." "What?" M asked. "Fear and horror don't destroy you," said. "Facing them alone destroys you. Every human combat veteran carries trauma, but we survive because we carry it together. We talk about it, support each other, and refuse to let our brothers face darkness alone." He projected his own memories directly to M, but this time he included what came after the trauma. Fellow soldiers checking on each other, veterans sharing their struggles, the bonds formed through shared suffering. "You felt my fear and pain, but did you feel what came after? The connections formed through surviving together, the strength we drew from each other." M processed this. "You are saying the horror is bearable because it is shared." "I'm saying horror is part of combat and you can't avoid it," said. "But you don't face it alone. Your squad, your unit, your brothers, they face it with you. That's what makes it survivable. Are telepathic, which means you can share this burden more completely than humans ever could. Use that gift. Don't let the horror isolate you. Let it connect you to your brothers who are experiencing the same thing." He stood. "Tomorrow we run the exercise again. But this time I want you focusing not just on my memories but on your squad mates. Feel their determination, their courage, their fear, yes, but also their choice to push forward anyway. You're all in this together. Use your telepathy to strengthen each other, not just to sense the horror." Across 3 worlds, 3 drill sergeants delivered the same essential message in different forms. Breaking is part of the process, not the end of it. The recruits had expected to be taught to avoid failure. Instead, they were being taught to fail forward, to break and rebuild stronger. Week 7 brought the first signs of transformation. Soldiers began making decisions under pressure without waiting for orders. Squads developed unique coordination patterns that emerged from individual personalities rather than hive programming. Learn to function through fear by drawing strength from each other's determination. The training intensified. Ran her through scenarios where everything went wrong simultaneously. Pushed his with impossible time limits and contradictory objectives. Subjected his to sustained emotional stress while requiring complex problem solving. The recruits stopped asking to quit. They'd learned what the drill sergeants already knew. The only way out was through. Week 10 brought the final test. Each group faced a massive combat simulation designed to be unwinnable. Every possible thing that could go wrong did go wrong. Communications failed. Commanders were killed. Supply lines were cut. Reinforcements never arrived. The enemy was overwhelming. The division fought for 18 hours straight before finally being overrun. But they'd held impossible positions for impossible lengths of time, adapting constantly to changing conditions. The swarm faced similar odds. Their hive-mind connection was deliberately jammed, forcing them to operate as independent squads. They developed field-expedient solutions that no hive mind would have considered because hive minds optimized for the group at the expense of creative individual thinking. They endured sustained psychological warfare alongside conventional combat. They learned to function while experiencing terror, grief, and exhaustion, using their telepathy to share strength rather than share suffering. All three divisions failed the final test in terms of winning the scenario. That was intentional. The test wasn't to win. It was to see if they could keep fighting effectively even while losing. And they had. And submitted their final reports to Ambassador Sarah, who forwarded them to the Coalition Military Council. The reports were simple. The alien recruits had been transformed from technicians into soldiers. But the real test was yet to come. Simulations could only prove so much. The galaxy needed to see these new soldiers face actual combat against the Devourers. Only then would anyone know if the human approach to training really worked across species, or if it was just an interesting experiment that proved nothing. The Devourers provided that test sooner than anyone expected. The border world of Ridge came under attack just 3 days after the training divisions completed their program. The world was defended by a single division. The same soldiers had trained for 12 weeks. Coalition Military Command watched the battle feeds with mixed hope and dread. This was the moment of truth. Either human training methods worked, or they'd wasted 12 weeks and a lot of political capital on an interesting failure. The Devourer fleet entered orbit and deployed ground forces using their standard doctrine. Overwhelming numbers, constant pressure, and focused attacks on command structures to create chaos in defender ranks. It had worked in dozens of previous battles. Units had consistently collapsed once their command networks were disrupted and officers were eliminated. The battle feeds showed Devourer shock troops landing and immediately targeting the command center with precision strikes. Within 20 minutes, the division's commanding officer was dead, communications were jammed, and battalion-level coordination was impossible. Coalition observers expected to see the familiar pattern: confusion, hesitation, retreat, and eventual rout. Instead, something different happened. Squad leaders immediately took command of their units without waiting for orders from above. Platoon sergeants coordinated locally using backup communication methods. Companies adapted to the changing tactical situation independently while maintaining alignment with overall defensive objectives. They weren't fighting like traditional soldiers, they were fighting like human Marines. When a battalion was surrounded and cut off from the main force, instead of surrendering or attempting to break out, the commander made a shocking decision. She called artillery down on her own position at danger close range, then immediately counterattacked through the confusion. It was a tactic straight from human military doctrine: when encircled, create chaos and attack through it. The Devourers had never encountered soldiers who behaved this way. Their tactical models assumed forces would fragment and collapse without coordination. Instead, they faced an enemy that adapted to disasters and turned them into opportunities. The battle lasted 14 hours. The division held Ridge with 62% survival rate, the highest for any coalition ground force in the war so far. More importantly, they'd won decisively. The Devourer ground forces in disorder, and their fleet retreated after taking unexpected losses from surface-to-orbit fire that never ceased despite all attempts to eliminate it. Commander watched the entire battle from the command center on Unity Station. When the last Devourer ship jumped away, he stood silently for several minutes, processing what he'd witnessed. Ambassador stood beside him. "Commander." "They fought like warriors," said quietly. "Not like warriors. Not like human warriors, like warriors. The distinction I thought existed between species does not. There is only the distinction between those trained to think and those trained to obey." Similar successes followed on other fronts. The division deployed to counter a Devourer incursion and displayed unprecedented tactical flexibility. Squads operated independently, developed creative solutions to unexpected problems, and showed initiative that surprised everyone including themselves. The unit faced the hardest psychological warfare the Devourers could produce. Telepathic species were supposedly vulnerable to certain types of mental attacks, but the soldiers had been trained to function through emotional trauma. They pushed through terror, maintained cohesion under psychological assault, and completed their objectives despite conditions that should have broken them. The galaxy watched these battles with growing astonishment. Alien soldiers were performing like human soldiers, not just surviving but thriving in chaos, adapting to disasters, and winning battles that coalition forces had consistently lost. The Coalition Military Council convened in emergency session. The evidence was overwhelming. Human training methods, adapted to each species' psychology, produced dramatically superior soldiers. The improvement wasn't marginal, it was revolutionary. General addressed the assembly, her mandibles clicking rapidly in a show of agitation that,